Yes, freeze! Hey everyone, it's the Philosopher here. I hope you're all doing well. So I've been working on my next video about repealing Obamacare, but decided to take a break from it to respond to this video titled Stefan Molyneux Gets Carried Away, made by a YouTuber who calls themselves The Observer. In the video, the YouTuber is criticizing Stefan's response to a person who called into his show telling Stefan how he thinks he should converse with leftists and anyone who argues based on feelings. In summary, the YouTuber, the caller, and many of the people who commented on Stefan's video don't understand Stefan's response to the caller and interpret it as Stefan getting defensive, being narcissistic, and avoiding the caller's question. Let's watch it together and see if we can sort through everyone's viewpoints.
Why do you not take a more active stance in telling your listeners about the effectiveness of the virtues of patience and tolerance when conducting a debate with people?
This is a great example of a loaded question, which is a question that has a presumption built into it so that it can't be answered without appearing guilty. The presumption in this question is that patience and tolerance is a virtue and are both effective when debating with people. Stefan may not agree with the caller that patience and tolerance are a virtue. On top of that, Stefan may not even understand or agree with the caller's definition of patient and tolerant. Patient and tolerant compared to what?
This is important because in today's society we encounter people who argue based on feelings and propaganda, but why should we take what they say so personal?
Here, the caller is asking another loaded question. The caller is implying that Stefan takes what people say, who say things based on feelings and propaganda, personally.
In my own experience, remaining calm when, for example, being called a racist and staying with my argument or maybe presenting it in a different way is more effective for actually changing people's minds than correcting their morality. I know that you have no responsibility over your audience's decisions, but I think it would be smart to show them a more effective way of getting this message of reason and truth across. That's from Fritz.
Here, the caller implies that Stefan could actually change people's minds instead of correcting their morality by staying calm, staying with his argument, and presenting it in a different way. He then says condescendingly that it would be smart of Stefan to show his listeners a more effective way of changing people's minds.
So you think that you're a better persuader than I am when it comes to changing people's minds in the world?
I disagree with the Observer here that Stefan missed the caller's point. The Observer doesn't even provide a counter for what the caller's point was. Okay, so Stefan missed the caller's point, so what was the caller's point? I agree with Stefan that the caller did imply that he was a better persuader and knew of a more effective way than Stefan does to change people's minds.
I mean, if you write to me and say that you're better than me at something, hey, maybe you are. I've got no problem with that. I mean, if you've got great things to teach me, I'm happy to hear. So I'm questioning, since you've claimed expertise in an area that I have been working in for, oh gosh, let's see now, 34 years. And I have the biggest and most popular philosophy show in the world. We got millions of listeners. People are dying to call in. They've got to wait forever to get a conversation with me. And
the Observer cuts off Stefan here to make him sound narcissistic for talking about his success. The Observer's text overlay says, "These are not arguments," which is funny because it shows how the Observer totally misses the point. Stefan wasn't making an argument. He was trying to convey to the caller why he is questioning the caller's claims of expertise. What the Observer cuts out is that Stefan goes on to say that he's wondering if the caller has any evidence to back up his claims of expertise. And he gives an example of what that evidence would look like by saying how he himself has received emails, messages, and comments from people saying how he changed their minds. The caller said that he knew of a more effective way to change people's minds, but hasn't given any evidence to support that claim.
All right, it is possible, even though you have that many years of experience, to sometimes get carried away. And
what does carried away mean?
There's so much wrong with the Observer's text overlay. Caller hilariously makes a valid point about Stefan's communication style. First, why is the caller's condescending statement hilarious? I guess it would be hilarious to hear someone insult someone who you really dislike. Secondly, how is this statement, without any example of how Stefan has gotten carried away before, or even what carried away means, a valid point? Lastly, the Observer implies that getting carried away is Stefan's communication style. I wonder if the Observer has any evidence to back up that claim.
I'm not like
sorry, I don't know what the word, sorry to interrupt. I don't know what the phrase carried away means.
Well, I'm about to explain it.
Well, what you should do is explain it before you use a somewhat inflammatory phrase, because carried away means that I'm not in control of myself. Don't have any mastery of my emotions. I don't have your 21-year-old highly nervous maturity.
Stefan is right in asking what carried away means to the caller and pointing out that it is an inflammatory phrase. The observer asks, why does he ask what it means if he then states he's offended by it? He asks because they could have very different ideas of what carried away looks like. I don't see a contradiction in Stefan asking the caller's perspective of the phrase and also saying what his own perspective of the phrase is.
So if you use a kind of insulting phrase, generally it's better to not use an inflammatory phrase, but to explain yourself ahead of time, because otherwise it just annoys people. Or maybe this is an example of how good you are at changing people's minds. But sorry, go ahead.
I agree with the observer that Stefan did get triggered here and made a passive-aggressive statement by saying, or maybe that's an example of how good you are at changing people's minds. However, I don't agree that getting triggered proves the caller's point, because the caller has yet to explain what he means by carried away, nor does he provide an example of when Stefan has gotten carried away. But let's see if the caller does.
It's really basic when you talk to someone and have a debate with someone, to, even if they don't change their mind right there and then in the conversation.
Stefan facepalms here and mouths, what? Because the caller still doesn't explain what he meant by carried away and adds another claim that Stefan doesn't treat people with respect in debates. Again, the caller speaks in generalities and doesn't support his claim with any evidence. He doesn't give an example of when he thinks Stefan was not treating with someone respect, and he still has yet to give an example of when Stefan has gotten carried away. It's like walking up to your spouse and saying, I'd be happier if you weren't so mean to me. You should really be nice to me. And not giving any examples of times your spouse was mean to you. The caller's comments so far and the parallel I just drew are examples of non-constructive criticisms. Non-constructive criticisms are vague and they don't tell the person receiving the criticisms what exactly they need to improve on or any examples of why the person giving the criticism thinks the way that they do. Constructive criticisms are very specific. For example, instead of saying to your spouse, I'd be happier if you weren't so mean to me, you could be very specific about the instance where you felt they were mean to you. For example, maybe they called you dumb when you used the can opener wrong. Your spouse then knows the exact situation where you felt that they were mean to you, and then you guys could have a conversation about it if he disagrees he was mean to you, or why he thought that or said that, or he could recognize that he was wrong and apologize. But the point is, he would know what exactly he did wrong, and he wouldn't be left guessing what you meant.
To give them respect. And even if they don't change their mind right there and then in the conversation, they might go home and they might think about it, and they're not going to be enraged or feel attacked.
Fritz.
When they feel attacked.
Fritz, yes. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I need to ask you. I need to ask you something. I don't know if you heard what you said. Maybe you did. Maybe you didn't.
I have a
but
quote.
It's very passive aggressive. So you said, in a debate, it's very basic. It's very basic. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, no, I'm still talking. It's you said it's very basic. So what you're doing is you're saying to me at the ripe old age of 21, you're saying to somebody who's been doing this thousands of times publicly for decades, or at least a decade publicly, and many times before that. And I've been trained in debating, and I've been trained in philosophy, and I've been trained in argumentation and so on, and trained in logic. You're saying, Steph, it's very basic what you need to do. And then you say it's important to treat people with respect.
Yes.
To change their minds. So far, you've accused me of getting carried away, which is a negative. Obviously, nobody ever says anything positive. When it comes to intellectual rigor, getting carried away is a bad thing. So you've already insulted me by saying I get carried away. And then you further insulted me by saying that I'm missing something very basic in exactly what I've dedicated my life to. And then you say it's really important to treat people with respect. How are you treating me with respect? Just out of curiosity, because what you're saying is pretty inflammatory. You understand?
Here, Stefan is trying to point out to the caller that his actions seem hypocritical to him so far, and explains that the 3 inflammatory phrases he's made felt disrespectful to him. Thus, the caller is not following his own should of treating people with respect. Though again, they could have very different ideas of what treating someone with respect looks like. There might be a language barrier that is preventing them from understanding each other, but to Stefan, the caller has yet to be clear about how Stefan has gotten carried away or hasn't treated people with respect in past conversations. So as I pointed out earlier, so far the caller has not given Stefan any constructive criticisms. He hasn't given specific examples of Stefan's communication with others. And thus, Stefan doesn't know what about his communication he can change because he doesn't even know what is wrong.
Yes, it is a criticism, and I think it is a concerning criticism. And that's
No, but you said you have to treat people with respect, and you're kind of insulting me. How is that treating me with respect? Shouldn't you be following the rules that you think I should be following, or are those rules only for me and not for you?
How can I tell you to treat people? How can I tell you that in another way? There's only one way of telling you that. Because
what do you mean? There's only one way to tell me what?
That I believe that sometimes you get carried away and you lose the respect for your opposition.
Again, the caller makes a very vague statement. He says, I believe, and does not provide any concrete examples. The caller sounds like he has good intentions. It could be a language barrier that's preventing them from understanding each other, but at this point, it just seems to me the caller doesn't understand how to give constructive criticisms. In the caller's mind, he's being very clear about his criticism, when in reality, he's been very general and non-specific. I think the fact that the caller doesn't even see how his criticism is not constructive is what's causing the tension between him and Stefan.
How should you convince me to treat people with respect, assuming that I'm not? Well, the first thing you would do is follow your own advice. Because you see, if you're not taking your advice, Fritz, I have no fucking clue why I should.
That's another point. It's not about taking things so personally. I feel like you also take things very personally, like you're doing right now. And I feel like it clouds you.
Here, the caller gets triggered from hearing the swear word or from hearing that he should follow his own advice. The caller defensively reacts by saying that Stefan is taking what he's saying too personally. Again, he's speaking in generalities and isn't specific about what he means. He's claiming that Stefan took what he said personally, which could be true, but is not relevant to Stefan's point that he thinks the caller has not been following his own advice, and that not following his own advice is not a good way to convince someone to follow your advice. In other words, Stefan's trying to make the point that it's not convincing to tell someone to do something that you yourself don't do. It's like me telling you, hey, you should be a peaceful parent, you shouldn't spank your kids, while I'm over here spanking and beating my children. You probably wouldn't feel very compelled to follow my advice.
It's not easy, so we have to be above the left. We have to be above the opposition. We have to not say things like that.
Why?
The observer thinks that the caller gave Stefan a good suggestion that goes over Stefan's head, but it actually goes over the observer's head why Stefan responded the way that he did. The caller said that Stefan ought to not say certain things to the left, but doesn't give a reason why he ought to do so. So Stefan simply asks him why. He's also not clear about what he means by those things, but based on his original question, he's likely referring to not pointing out someone's morality.
Because it will help them see truth and evidence. It will easier help them come to see science and come to accept facts and reason and truth.
The caller claims that by not saying certain things to people who think based on feelings, it will help those people come to accept facts, reason, and evidence. But he has yet to give any evidence for this claim.
Do you know how many people have watched that Muslim ban show?
Like 250,000, like around there, maybe?
No, it's if you include the podcast downloads, it's probably about 1 million.
And maybe it could be 2 million.
Well, you see, but then you need to show me. Because this idea that I'm running the largest and most successful philosophy show, but you at the age of 21 know how to make it even bigger and better, just go make one bigger and better.
The observer seems to get triggered whenever Stefan mentions his success. The observer misses the point here. The caller is implying that Stefan could have 2 million views on that video instead of 1 million if he followed his oughts. Stefan is right in responding that, okay, then you need to show me that. Stefan is bringing up his success in order to convey how it's not convincing to hear someone with zero experience tell him how to make his show bigger and better. It'd be like a janitor who has never made a sale in their life telling a sales rep who's made millions of dollars in sales that they could double their sales if they just listened to their advice. That sales rep would either ignore the person or say, "Why should I listen to you?" This is the point that the observer misses.
I mean, the idea that I'm going to take advice from, do you have any public videos that you've made?
No, I don't.
So you have no experience engaging with the public in the realm of ideas, right? None whatsoever.
No, I'm getting into it right now, I guess.
No.
Here, Stefan is reacting to the caller's deflection and wants to reiterate his point again to the caller, since the caller didn't understand his point and seems resistant to understanding it.
You have no experience whatsoever about how to engage the public in the realm of ideas, right? Zero. You understand from where I'm standing? It's rather a startling claim to be on the receiving end of. You've got zero experience. You're bringing up a show that has infinity more views than you've achieved in your 21 years. And you're telling me how I could get to 2 million when you haven't even gotten to 1. So hang on, do you find that the left is more disrespectful or me?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter what the left does. That's my point. It doesn't matter. Like,
No. It does matter, Fritz, because if you're going to have a universal value that you want to impose on me called be respectful, then I need to know how you impose it on others. Because if you're going to make up the supposedly universal value and only apply it to me, I'm going to tell you to take a long walk off a short pier.
Stefan wraps up the call by trying to see if the caller imposes the same values for debating on the left that he does for Stefan. The caller responds by saying it doesn't matter what the left does, which makes it even less convincing for Stefan to follow the ought. The caller still hasn't been specific and clear in his suggestions, hasn't given evidence for his claims, and is now telling Stefan to follow a standard that he says shouldn't apply to others.
I'm not imposing anything on you. I'm saying that I believe that it would be better and a more efficient way to spread reason and truth, to still be, passionate, still be angry, but to not be disrespectful. It's about the most...
Fritz, we went through this already. We went through this already. Steph asked you, are you holding the left to account with these high standards that you're imposing? Or is it just Steph that's being held to those standards? That was the question. We went through the previous thing before. So answer the question, are you holding other people on the left to these standards, or are you just holding people to the right, or Steph, to these standards?
Well, I don't think I'm holding anyone to these standards.
If disrespect is your issue, you should be out there lecturing the left, not me, right? But you're not doing that.
But I don't care if people are disrespectful. That's not what it's about.
Sorry?
I don't care if people are disrespectful.
Oh, good. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next caller because you don't care whether people are disrespectful. So this whole thing has been a complete waste of time because you don't care about this at all. You've just got some weird emotional thing where you like to talk about this stuff when it has no value to you whatsoever. You don't care whether people are disrespectful, but somehow I shouldn't be disrespectful. What a bunch of nonsense.
It appears that the observer gets triggered by Stefan's frustrated tone of voice. The observer, instead of trying to understand why Stefan became so frustrated with the caller, reacts by throwing an ad hom at Stefan, saying Steph finishes the call being the usual dickhead that he is. The reason Stefan became even more frustrated than he already was because the caller contradicted himself. For their entire 40-minute conversation, the caller was telling Stefan how he ought to converse with the left, how he ought to be respectful, not get carried away, and not take things so personally, which again he didn't provide specific instances of and remained vague with his oughts. So for 40 straight minutes, he told Stefan how he ought to be, but then turned around at the very end and said that he's not holding anyone to standards and doesn't care what anyone does. I get why Stefan, being frustrated as he already was, would want to end the conversation and be done with the call. Although my talking points and reactions to the caller may have been different, I would have felt frustrated too.
I'm sorry you're not cut out for this kind of fight. I guess you got to go back to the lab and study stuff rather than join us in changing the world. I wish you would, but I don't think you ever will. Thanks a lot for the call. Let's move on to the next caller.
By saying, of course the show didn't go over well, along with the comments he's made so far, the observer implies that the reason the show didn't go over well is due to Stefan, and his inability to hear criticisms. That is not why the show didn't go over well. The show didn't go over well because the caller made several claims without supporting evidence or reason, and because the caller gave 0 examples of Stefan's behavior in past shows. If the caller had at least given examples of past conversations Stefan's had where he got, quote, carried away or was disrespectful, then their conversation likely would have went better, because then they could have discussed those specific times and maybe reach an agreement on Stefan's communication and how he could have done better in those moments. In other words, if the caller had made constructive criticisms, then they would have had something concrete and clear to talk about.
Steph, before we move on to the next caller, if you would let me talk, and you don't forget to, I know this is really basic, but if you could go on one of your little rants, I'd be curious what you have to say about patience and tolerance as a virtue. Do you think patience is a virtue?
Do I think patience and I think that you pay like with like.
Mike asks Stefan whether or not he thinks patience and tolerance is a virtue. Stefan's answer, most of which is cut out, is that no, he doesn't think patience and tolerance is a virtue, and that he prefers to match like with like. He says that he doesn't think he should continue to, quote, be nice, and refrain from calling people out on their moral hypocrisy, such as the violent Antifa and leftist protesters who beat Milo and Trump supporters, yet claim that they are for peace and tolerance.
And the people who resist criticism repeat everything that they should be criticized for. Right? I mean, it's natural. Criticism is like the bing, bounce off like the pinball. It's supposed to push you back. It's supposed to make you recoil. It's supposed to make you change path, change course.
To end the video, the observer repeats this phrase several times over different comments on the video in order to imply that Stefan ignores criticisms and is thus being hypocritical. The comments he shows, however, are not constructive criticisms, just like his own comments and just like the caller's comments, which is why for many of the comments, Stefan replies with his famous not an argument, because there's nothing for Stefan to respond to. Stefan's petty, overly emotional way of dealing with this guy is proving this guy's point. Stefan is a grade A clinical narcissist. This is effing retarded. Stefan needs professional help. He's coming undone. Stefan is right that this is not an argument. Neither is it a constructive criticism. The statements are vague and not specific. This person is just making assertions and throwing ad homs without any supporting evidence. Based on your logic, Hillary should have won the presidency and Trump should have shut up and listened because she has the experience. Oy vey, Steph, oy vey. This is a straw man and is twisting Stefan's point that because the caller doesn't have any experience, that it's confusing for Stefan to know how he can improve when the caller has no proof that his communication method is much more effective than his. Stefan never told the caller to just shut up and listen. This is your worst video, Stefan. You're absolutely insufferable here. I could analyze it more in depth, but your faults are incredibly self-evident. Maybe you don't have quite enough self-awareness to realize them, though. I honestly hope you lose subscribers, but I'm sure your psychophants will find a way to rationalize your insanity. Yeah, that's not an argument, and it's not a constructive criticism. Not sure what the point of trashing this guy is. It's obviously he's way out of his league, but you're bashing him in a way that shows very little class. I think the guy gave his opinion. Looks like you were having a bad day and you unloaded on this poor guy. Again, this is not a constructive criticism. Steph got triggered. The triggered fallacy, not a constructive criticism. Really embarrassing. Stop carving yourself a philosopher, Stefan. You're a joke and can't even handle a simple argument. Steph, I love your vids. I have nothing but respect for you, but this was really unfair. Just bashing on the guy and not letting him get a word in. If we can't have honest, calm discussions about any topic, even subjects that might trigger strong emotions, then we ruse this batter. It does seem like what Stefan feeds off of is winning conversations or assuring himself that he is the best, rather than explore ideas with someone. I think he sees questions as challenges to prove himself. I like Stefan, but he definitely has a narcissistic tinge to him. Would explain the acting endeavor in his earlier years. For F's sake, grow up, Stefan. You were far too cantankerous with this guy. 1. There's a lot of nuance in language that doesn't come across correctly all the time. 2. You felt attacked and lashed out. You can deny that it's confrontational, but it is. Maybe calm down, man. He ain't your enemy. 3. Jesus, let him finish his sentences.
Yikes, Stefan. Put your ego in the closet and never let it out again. Stay on topic and follow the patterns of your older shows. Which made you famous?
Wow, I'm unsubbing. You are a very condescending, generalizing, and vain man. A real leader doesn't need to convince people at all. A real leader leads by example and shows the truth from the perspective of the greater good. Assigning blame just limits your audience and provides further enragement and segregation. This lad has a very good point. Looks like the comments are proving the boy's theory to be correct. Here's your evidence, Steph. Your own audience is turning against you because you shot down a young man's honest, respectful criticism. You've exposed your biggest weakness here better than you ever have. You have an incredibly high opinion of yourself to the point where you'll get... This is a great example of the bandwagon fallacy. The belief that an argument is valid just because a majority of people accept it. Latest call is completely contradictory. Young guy calls in to ask Steph to be nicer. Steph gets way overly offended and takes his comments as insulting. Then Steph proceeds to disrespect the kid back and finally argues that it is necessary to be disrespectful. There were additional contradictions with the call, but I don't have time for that now. You see, Steph is running a fine line between philosophy and entertainment. This is the latter. Every day, more and more people are waking up to the fact that you're a complete nutter. Stefan should stop doing call-in shows if he can't handle criticism. I've listened to him treat callers like this a number of times. Jesus, Stefan, did you have a bad day or something? First you misunderstood his question, then confused the caller, and on top of that, just be a spectacular douche to the guy for no reason. I hope you understand that you proved his point. Not your finest hour, Steph. I hope those accents were as good as they were fun to do. None of these comments were arguments, nor were they constructive criticisms. Throughout the entire video, the observer is projecting his personal view of Stefan, which appears to be that of a narcissistic dickhead who can't handle criticism. The observer did not watch the call with an open, objective mindset, and instead, whether consciously or subconsciously, was solely focused on picking out anything to affirm his biases. The caller did the same. The observer's criticism of the call, along with the caller's responses to Stefan, are a great illustration of what happens when one is not aware of their own confirmation biases, having blind spots as a result. Awareness of one's own biases and being willing to re-examine them is important when it comes to remaining open-minded, open to being wrong, flexible, and getting closer to the truth. Making this video has definitely solidified my understanding of constructive criticisms and how to differentiate between constructive and destructive criticisms. Knowing the difference between constructive and destructive criticisms is important in not only effectively communicating to someone whose behavior you want to change, but also in being able to discern whether someone's giving you a constructive criticism versus a destructive one. This is a skill that I think will help people have healthy building relationships with others. By being direct and objective about your experience, you make it clear for others what exactly is going on for you and why you think the way that you do. Compared to destructive criticisms, which are vague statements and generalizations which tend to be shaming of the other person, as you can see with most of the comments I read off. Constructive criticisms are just another tool in the toolbox of effective communication and having a healthy and vulnerable relationship with somebody. If your spouse said something that hurt your feelings, it will be a lot more constructive if you're clear and direct about the specific instance where they hurt your feelings versus making some generalization that your spouse is a mean person, doesn't care about you, etc. Anyway, I hope this was helpful for you guys. Please let me know in the comments below what you think, or if you have any constructive criticisms of this video. Thank you all for watching, take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, freeze!